The Galactic Trade Confederacy had controlled commerce across 12 star systems for more than 3,000 years. Every species that reached the stars eventually learned the same hard lesson. You negotiate, you compromise, you bow to the greater powers, and then you survive. They had learned this lesson first, and they had built the Confederacy on that foundation. They had learned it next when their rebellion failed and their cities burned. They had learned it when they watched 3 of their colony worlds turn to ash. Everyone learned eventually. So when the human colony ship emerged from hyperspace near the Arcturus trading hub in the year 2347, the Confederacy assumed these newcomers would follow the same pattern. They always did. It was simply a matter of time and pressure. High Commissioner stood on the observation deck of his flagship and watched the small human vessel drift into scanning range. He was tall and proud with iridescent scales that shifted between blue and green depending on his mood. Right now they were calm silver. This was routine work. He had integrated dozens of species into the Confederacy during his 200 years of service. Humans would be no different. His aide stood nearby, nervous with too many eyes and not enough confidence. Was always worried about something. Today he was worried about the humans. They are broadcasting on standard frequencies, reported. They seem to understand basic galactic communication protocols. Impressive for a species so young. All species figure out communication quickly, replied. It is survival instinct. They know they need to talk before they can trade. Send them the standard greeting and integration terms. Transmitted the message. The terms were simple and clear. Humanity would surrender 60% of all mined resources to the Confederacy. They would provide 10,000 workers annually for Confederacy construction projects. They would accept monitoring stations on all human worlds. They would submit to regular inspections of their military capabilities. In exchange, humanity would receive protection from external threats and limited trading rights within Confederacy space. It was a generous offer. Some species had been given far worse terms. The response came from a woman named Lisa Grant. She was the captain of and the highest-ranking human official in this sector of space. Her image appeared on the main view screen. She was smaller than had expected. Humans were apparently a compact species. She had brown hair pulled back from her face and steady dark eyes that showed no fear at all. "We decline," she said. The message ended. Stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then he turned to with confusion plain on his face. "Play it again." Played the message 3 more times. Each time the human woman said the same 2 words. "We decline," nothing else. No counter-offer, no request for negotiation, no plea for better terms, just a simple flat refusal. "Perhaps they misunderstand," suggested hopefully. "Should we clarify the terms, explain what happens to species that refuse?" "Yes," said slowly. "Send it again, make certain they understand the consequences." The second transmission was longer and far less friendly. It outlined in precise detail what happened to species that refused Confederacy integration. First came economic isolation. No Confederacy world would trade with them. No Confederacy ship would carry their goods. They would be cut off from the galactic economy completely. Then came resource blockades. Confederacy fleets would surround their worlds and prevent any mining or harvesting operations. They would slowly starve. And if they still refused, then military intervention would follow. They had lost 3 colony worlds before they finally submitted. They had watched their burn. The message included images from both events: burning cities, fleeing refugees, the broken hulks of destroyed warships. Lisa Grant's second response arrived within the hour. This time she did not bother with video. It was text only. "We understand perfectly. The answer is still no. We do not bargain with bullies." Felt his scales flush red with anger. In 200 years of service, no species had ever spoken to him this way. No species had ever been foolish enough to refuse twice. "They have 1 ship," he said, to 1 colony vessel with minimal weapons and perhaps 10,000 people aboard. "And they presume to call us bullies. They presume to refuse." "What should we do, High Commissioner?" Considered the question. Part of him wanted to destroy the human ship immediately, burn it to atoms and let that serve as a lesson. But no, that would be wasteful. The Confederacy did not destroy potential resources without cause, and besides there might be more humans out there somewhere. Other colonies, better to teach this species a lesson they would remember and pass on to future generations. "Contact High Command," ordered. "Request a blockade fleet. We will surround them, cut them off from all resources, let them float in the darkness until hunger and desperation teach them the wisdom of cooperation." Hurried to comply. While they waited for the fleet to arrive, continued to study the humans. He accessed every database the Confederacy had compiled on this new species. There was not much information yet. Humans came from a small blue world called Earth in a remote arm of the galaxy. They had achieved the light travel only recently. They were a young species, ambitious but primitive. They should have been easy to intimidate. And yet Lisa Grant's eyes haunted him. There had been no fear in them, no uncertainty. When she refused the Confederacy's terms, she had done so with the calm confidence of someone who had already considered all the consequences and accepted them. That bothered more than he wanted to admit. The blockade fleet arrived 2 weeks later. 47 warships dropped out of hyperspace and surrounded the small human settlement near Arcturus. Each ship was capable of reducing a moon to rubble. Each ship carried weapons that could crack a planet's crust. Against such force, the single human colony ship was nothing, a grain of sand against an ocean. Watched the fleet take position and felt his confidence return. Let the humans see what true power looked like. Let them count the weapons pointed at their fragile vessel. They would learn, they would bend, everyone did eventually. He settled back in his command chair and waited for the surrender that was surely coming. He would be waiting for a very long time. The blockade fleet held position around the human settlement for 3 days before Lisa Grant made contact. Had expected her to call sooner. He had expected panic and desperation. Instead, when her face appeared on his view screen, she looked exactly the same as before, calm, steady, unafraid. "Your ships are blocking our mining routes," she said. "We need you to move them." Almost laughed. The audacity of this small creature was almost admirable, almost. "You are in no position to make demands, human. You are surrounded, outnumbered. Surrender now and accept our terms. Perhaps we may show mercy." "We do not want mercy," Lisa replied. "We want you to move your ships. You have 1 week." This time did laugh. It was a harsh clicking sound that echoed through his bridge. His crew joined in. The idea that these humans thought they could threaten the Confederacy was simply too amusing. "And what happens in 1 week, human? Will you attack us with your single vessel? Will you throw rocks at our warships?" "Something like that." The transmission ended. Shook his head and turned to his tactical officer. "Continue the blockade. Monitor all their communications. I want to know the moment they begin discussing surrender." The days passed slowly. Confederacy intelligence officers monitored every signal coming from the human settlement. They tracked resource consumption and projected how long supplies would last. The humans had enough food for perhaps 6 months if they rationed carefully. Water could be recycled indefinitely, but certain medications would run out within weeks. Certain processed nutrients would follow. Slowly but surely, the blockade would squeeze them into submission. On the 4th day, something strange happened. The humans stopped all external communications. Their settlement went completely silent. No signals, no transmissions, nothing but the quiet hum of life support systems. Reported this development with obvious concern. "They have gone dark, High Commissioner. We cannot determine what they are doing." "They are discussing surrender," said confidently. "They are among themselves about who to blame for this situation. It is normal. Let them have their silence. When they are ready to talk, they will contact us." But the silence continued. Day 5, day 6. On the morning of day 7 began to feel the first stirrings of doubt. He pushed the feeling aside. What could the humans possibly do? They had 1 ship, 1 small settlement, a few thousand people at most. Against the might of the Confederacy, they were nothing. Then the alarms started screaming. "Contact," the tactical officer shouted. "Multiple hyperspace signatures behind us." Spun toward the main display. What he saw there made his scales turn white with shock. 17 human warships had appeared directly behind the Confederacy fleet. They had not come through any known hyperspace lane. They had not been detected on any long-range scanner. They had simply appeared from nowhere, as if they had stepped out of empty space itself. The ships were smaller than Confederacy vessels, but they bristled with weapons. Their hulls were angular and aggressive, and their weapons were already powered. Their targeting systems were already locked onto the Confederacy fleet. A new voice came over the communication channel. It was a male human this time. His name appeared on the identification display as Commander Daniel Hayes of the USS Defiance. "High Commissioner," he said, "you were warned. Captain Grant asked you to move your ships. You chose not to listen. Now you have a choice. Move your fleet out of this system in the next 5 minutes, or we will move it for you." Found his voice with difficulty. "This is impossible. Where did you come from? How did you get past our sensors?" 4 minutes and 30 seconds. "You cannot threaten us. We have 47 warships. You have 17. The mathematics are clearly in our." "Mathematics," Daniel Hayes said quietly, "are not everything. 3 minutes." Looked at his tactical display. His ships were out of position. They had been arranged for a blockade, not a battle. The human ships had appeared in the perfect location to exploit every weakness in his formation. It was almost as if they had known exactly where his fleet would be. "All ships, ordered, battle formation, target the enemy vessels." His fleet began to move. 47 warships turned their weapons toward the 17 human vessels. The numbers were still overwhelming. Even caught off guard, the Confederacy should have had the advantage. 2 minutes, Daniel Hayes said. I suggest you hurry with your decision. We do not negotiate with inferior species, shouted. We do not bow to threats. You have made a terrible mistake, human. You have just declared war on the most powerful force in the galaxy. 1 minute. Fire screamed. All ships fire, destroy them. The Confederacy fleet opened up with everything they had. Plasma cannons, kinetic accelerators, missile batteries, thousands of weapons fired at once. The space between the two fleets filled with light and death. And then the humans moved. Their ships did not follow any pattern had ever seen. They did not form defensive lines or retreat to regroup. Instead, they scattered like startled birds and then came together again in new formations. They twisted and spun through the incoming fire. They used each other as shields and then broke apart before the enemy could adjust. It was chaos. It was madness. It was devastatingly effective. The first Confederacy ship died within seconds. The second followed moments later. The humans were not just dodging. They were firing back with terrible accuracy. Every shot seemed to find a weak point. Every missile struck exactly where it would do the most damage. Watched his fleet die and felt something he had never experienced before in 200 years of service. Fear. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, 39 Confederacy warships were destroyed or disabled. 8 had managed to flee into hyperspace. The human fleet had suffered only minor damage, a few hull breaches, some scorched armor plating, nothing that would stop them from fighting again. Daniel Hayes appeared on the viewscreen one final time. Behind him could see the wreckage of his once mighty fleet floating in the darkness. You were warned, Hayes said. Remember that. The next time someone asks you to leave them alone, maybe you should listen. The transmission ended. Sat alone on his crippled bridge and tried to understand what had just happened. His ship was one of the survivors, but only barely. Half his crew was dead. His engines were destroyed. He was drifting helplessly through space while human ships flew past him without a second glance. They had won, the impossible had happened, the unthinkable had occurred. And knew with terrible certainty that this was only the beginning. The 8 surviving Confederacy ships limped back to Prime with stories that would change the galaxy forever. Captain was the first to reach the Grand Assembly. He had commanded one of the heavy cruisers in the blockade fleet. Now his ship was a burned-out wreck barely held together by emergency repairs. He walked into the assembly chamber on shaking legs and faced the senators with hollow eyes. Tell us what happened, Senator demanded. He was a large with 4 arms and a voice like grinding stone. How did a primitive species defeat our fleet? Took a long breath before. They did not fight like any species we have encountered before. They did not follow standard tactics. They did not behave rationally. Explain. When we fired at them, they did not try to form defensive formations. They scattered, but then they came back together in ways we could not predict. Each ship seemed to act independently, but somehow they all coordinated perfectly. It was like fighting smoke. Every time we thought we had them targeted, they were somewhere else. Lady of the delegation leaned forward with interest. Surely your tactical computers could adapt. The Confederacy has the most advanced battle algorithms in the galaxy. Our computers could not keep up, admitted. The humans made decisions that our systems could process. By the time our targeting solutions updated, they had already moved. It was as if they could see the future. The assembly murmured with disbelief. This was not possible. The Confederacy had spent centuries perfecting their military technology. Their ships were the finest in known space. Their weapons were devastating. Their tactics were proven across countless battles. There must be some explanation, Senator insisted. Some secret weapon we did not detect. I do not know of any weapon, said. What I know is what I saw. Their ships were smaller than ours. Their weapons seemed similar to our own, but they used them with terrible skill. Every shot found a weak point. Every missile struck where it would do the most damage. They knew exactly where to hit us. And when you tried to negotiate, Chancellor asked quietly. He was the eldest alive. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had guided the Confederacy through a dozen crises, but even he looked troubled by this report. Shuddered visibly. That was the worst part. When the battle turned against us, I contacted their commander. I offered standard surrender terms, ceasefire, prisoner exchange, reparations, all the normal protocols. And he ignored me completely, just kept firing. When I contacted him again and for mercy, he finally responded. He said we do not negotiate with people who threaten to burn our homes. Then he cut the channel and destroyed 2 more of our ships. The assembly fell silent. This was unprecedented. Every species negotiated. It was the foundation of galactic civilization. Wars were fought, but they always ended at the bargaining table. Both sides would calculate their losses and find a compromise. That was how things worked. That was how things had always worked. "They are insane," Senator declared. "This species is clearly defective. They cannot be reasoned with because they are incapable of reason." "I do not think they are insane," Lady said thoughtfully. "I think they simply have different values than we do. They value their independence more than they value survival." "That is the same thing as insanity." "Is it?" Lady turned to face the assembly. "The surrendered to the Confederacy 300 years ago. We lost 3 colony worlds in the war before we submitted. Since then we have lived under your rule. We have prospered in some ways, but we have also lost something. Our pride, our independence, our sense of who we are as a people. Sometimes I wonder if surrender was truly the wise choice." The assembly erupted in angry voices. Several senators accused Lady of treason. Others demanded she be removed from the chamber, but she stood her ground and waited for the noise to die down. "I am not calling for rebellion," she said calmly. "I am simply observing that the humans have shown us another way. They have proven that resistance is possible, that the Confederacy is not invincible. That is a dangerous idea, not because it is wrong but because it is true." While the Grand Assembly argued among themselves, the news of the human victory spread across the galaxy. It traveled through trade routes and communication networks. It passed from ship to ship and world to world, and everywhere it went it left chaos in its wake. On Prime, the stock markets crashed. Trading corporations that had operated for centuries began liquidating their assets. Ships that had been scheduled to pass through human territory changed their routes. No one wanted to risk these strange creatures who fought without reason and refused to negotiate. On world, citizens gathered in public squares to discuss what they had heard. Many of them had never known anything but Confederacy rule. Their parents and grandparents had surrendered long ago, but now they whispered questions they had never dared ask before. What if we had fought harder? What if we had refused to give up? What if we had been like the humans? On smaller worlds occupied by minor species, the effect was even more dramatic. There were a small reptilian race who had been under Confederacy control for over 1,000 years. They had no military, they had no weapons, they had nothing but their obedience, but now they were watching the news feeds with something new in their eyes. Hope, elder of the, gathered his people and spoke to them for the first time in decades. "For 1,000 years we have believed that resistance was impossible," he said. "We have believed that the Confederacy was too powerful to oppose. We have believed that survival meant submission. But the humans have shown us that these beliefs were lies. They have shown us that even the mighty can fall. They have shown us that freedom is possible for those willing to fight for it." They did not start a rebellion that day. They were not ready for that yet, but they began to prepare. They began to plan. They began to dream of a future they had never allowed themselves to imagine. And they were not alone. Across the galaxy, 1,000 different species were having the same thoughts. 1,000 different peoples were asking the same questions. 1,000 different worlds were watching the humans and wondering if they too could be free. The Confederacy had ruled for 3,000 years by convincing everyone that resistance was futile. In 11 minutes, the humans had proven that belief wrong. The galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the Battle of Arcturus, the Galactic Trade Confederacy was falling apart. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily and surely, like a great tree rotting from within. They were the first to formally withdraw. Their ambassador stood before the Grand Assembly and delivered a simple message. "We no longer recognize Confederacy authority over our worlds. We will govern ourselves. We will trade with whom we choose. We will make our own alliances. Any attempt to stop us will be met with force." Senator rose to his feet with fury in his eyes. "You cannot do this. You signed the Integration Treaty. You are bound by law." "Laws made under threat of annihilation," the ambassador replied. "Laws we never truly agreed to. Laws that mean nothing now that we have seen they can be broken. We will crush you. We will burn your worlds just as we did before." "Perhaps, but perhaps not. The humans have shown that your fleets can be defeated. We are willing to take that chance." The ambassador turned and walked out of the chamber. No one tried to stop him. The followed 2 weeks later, Lady delivered their withdrawal in person. She did not make threats or accusations. She simply stated that her people had chosen a different path. The Confederacy could accept this peacefully, or they could try to stop it. Either way, they were done submitting. Chancellor watched these defections with growing despair. He had devoted his entire life to building and maintaining the Confederacy. He had believed that their system of integration and control was necessary for galactic stability. Now he saw it crumbling before his eyes. "We must negotiate with the humans," he told the assembly. They are the source of this chaos. If we can reach an agreement with them, perhaps the others will return to the fold. Negotiate, Senator spat, with the species that humiliated us, never. Then what do you suggest? We cannot fight everyone at once. We do not have the ships. We do not have the resources. The blockade fleet was supposed to intimidate the galaxy into obedience. Instead, its destruction has inspired rebellion everywhere. High Commander spoke from his seat in the military section. We could try a larger fleet, 100 ships, 200. Surely we could overwhelm them with numbers. Could we? Chancellor asked. Our best tacticians have been studying the battle recordings for months. They still cannot explain how the humans won. Until we understand their capabilities, any attack would be foolish. Then what do you propose? I propose that we send an ambassador, someone who can speak to them calmly, someone who can find out what they want. Perhaps there is something we can offer them. Perhaps there is some compromise that would satisfy them. The assembly debated for hours, but in the end they had no better options. They selected a diplomatic team and sent them toward human space with instructions to negotiate in good faith. Meanwhile, Lisa Grant had been promoted to admiral and given command of all human military forces in the Arcturus sector. She spent her days coordinating and meeting with representatives from species who wanted to learn from human success. They had sent a delegation. So had the and the Ocean and a dozen other small races who had lived under Confederacy rule for generations. Elder of the sat across from her in a small conference room on the human station. His scales were grey with age, and his eyes carried the weight of centuries of oppression. We wish to understand, he said quietly. How do you do it? How do you refuse so easily? Lisa considered the question carefully. It is not easy. Every time we refuse there is a cost. Every time we stand our ground we risk everything. But we have decided that some things are more important than safety. What things? Freedom, dignity, the right to make our own choices without someone else holding a weapon to our head. Lisa leaned forward. Let me ask you something. How many of your people have died under Confederacy rule? His expression darkened. Millions, perhaps billions over the centuries. They worked us in their mines and factories. They took our children for their armies. They punished any sign of resistance with mass executions. And how many would die if you fought back? We do not know. We have never tried. Then you have already lost billions without even trying to win. At least when you fight you have a chance. At least when you resist you keep your dignity. The Confederacy taught you that submission was the only way to survive. They lied. Was silent for a long moment. Then he asked the question that had been burning inside him since the news of the human victory first reached his world. Will you help us? Lisa shook her head slowly. We cannot fight your battles for you. If we did you would simply trade one master for another. But we can teach you. We can show you how we think, how we train, how we prepare for battle. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. Why would you help us? You do not know us. You owe us nothing. Because nobody deserves to live on their knees. Because every species should have the chance to choose their own path. Because the Confederacy built their power on the belief that resistance was futile, and we want to prove them wrong over and over again until everyone in the galaxy understands that they were lying. Bowed his head. Thank you, we will not forget this. The Confederacy diplomatic team arrived 3 weeks later. They came in an unarmed vessel with white flags flying and peaceful intentions declared on all frequencies. Lisa Grant met them at the docking bay. The lead diplomat was unnamed. He was younger than but had the same proud bearing and iridescent scales. He looked at Lisa with barely concealed contempt. I am here to discuss terms, he said. The Confederacy is prepared to offer significant concessions in exchange for peace. We do not want concessions, Lisa replied. We want to be left alone, that is all we have ever wanted. But surely there must be something. Trade rights, technology, territory, every species wants something. Not us, we will trade with anyone who wants to trade fairly. We will share technology with anyone who asks politely. We do not want your territory, we have enough space for our own needs. Looked confused. This was not how negotiations were supposed to work. Then what do we have to discuss? Nothing. Go home. Tell your leaders to stop threatening smaller species. Tell them to let people make their own choices. Tell them that the age of forced integration is over. Lisa smiled without warmth. And tell them that if they send another fleet against us we will destroy that one too. You cannot expect us to simply accept this. The Confederacy has ruled for 3,000 years. We cannot allow one species to overturn the entire galactic order. Then do not allow it. Fight us, send your fleets, try to conquer us. Lisa stepped closer and her voice dropped to a whisper. But remember what happened last time. Remember the ships burning in the darkness. Remember the screams on your communication channels, and ask yourself if you are really ready to pay that price again." Had no answer, he turned and walked back to his ship. The diplomatic mission had failed completely. But as his vessel pulled away from the human station, he could not help looking back at the small figures watching from the observation windows. They were so few, so fragile, so utterly certain of themselves. And for the first time in his life, understood what it felt like to be afraid of something smaller than himself. 3 years after the Battle of Arcturus, the galaxy had transformed into something unrecognizable. The Galactic Trade Confederacy still existed, but it was a shadow of its former glory. They had established their own independent republic. They had renegotiated their terms and now paid only a fraction of their former tribute. 12 smaller species, including they had formed something called the Free Worlds Alliance. They traded freely with each other and with humanity. They defended each other against threats. They had built something new on the ashes of the old order. They watched all of this with a mixture of anger and despair. Their empire was shrinking. Their power was fading. Species that had once trembled at their name now looked at them with contempt. Chancellor called a final meeting of the High Council. He was old now, older than any had a right to be. His scales had faded to a dull grey and his voice had lost its commanding power, but his mind was still sharp and he could see the future clearly. "We have a choice," he told the council. "We can continue to fight. We can try to hold on to what remains of our power through force and intimidation. We can spend the next century bleeding ourselves dry in pointless wars against enemies who are no longer afraid of us." Or, High Commander asked bitterly. He had rebuilt the fleet 3 times now. Each time the humans or their allies had found ways to him. Each time he had lost more ships and more soldiers. "Or we can accept reality. The age of forced integration is over. We must find a new way forward." "You are suggesting we surrender." "I am suggesting we adapt. The humans do not want to rule the galaxy. They do not want to replace us. They simply want to be left alone and to see others treated fairly. Perhaps we can work with that." The council argued for days. Many wanted to continue fighting. They could not accept that their 3,000-year empire was ending. They could not accept that a species they had dismissed as primitive had humbled them so completely. But in the end, practicality won out over pride. The Confederacy simply did not have the resources for another war. Their economy was collapsing. Their military was demoralized. Their subject species were leaving than they could be replaced. Chancellor sent a message to Admiral Lisa Grant, requesting a meeting on neutral ground. She agreed. They met on a small station in unclaimed space, brought only a few advisors. Lisa came alone except for Commander Daniel Hayes, who stood quietly in the corner. "I have come to discuss the future," said, "not as a conqueror seeking terms, but as one leader to another." "Lisa, I am listening." "The Confederacy wishes to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. As equals, we recognize that we cannot force you to submit. We accept that our old methods no longer work." "That is a good start." "We also wish to discuss mutual arrangements. There are other powers beyond Confederacy space, the hegemony, the silent empire. Some of them are even less reasonable than we were. Perhaps together we could stop them from doing what you did to everyone else." Flinched but did not deny it. "Yes, exactly that." Lisa was quiet for a long moment. She looked at Daniel, who gave a small shrug. This was her decision to make. "We are open to discussion," she finally said. "But I want to be clear about something. We are not going to become you. We are not going to build an empire. We are not going to threaten smaller species into obedience." "Then what will you do?" "We will trade fairly. We will explore freely. We will defend ourselves and our friends. And when we see someone being bullied, we will offer them a choice." Lisa smiled. "The same choice you offered us, submit or fight." "And if they choose to fight, will you arm them, train them, turn them against us?" "Only if you give them reason to fight. Treat people fairly and you will have nothing to fear from us. Continue to oppress them and yes, we will help them resist. That is not a threat. It is simply who we are." Considered this for a long time. It was not the answer he had hoped for, but it was honest. And after 3,000 years of lies and manipulation, perhaps honesty was exactly what the galaxy needed. "I believe I understand," he said slowly. "Your species is different. You do not seek power for its own sake. You do not wish to dominate others. You simply wish to live according to your own values and to see those values spread." "That is close enough." "Then perhaps we can find common ground after all," extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement. "Let us begin." Lisa took his hand and shook it firmly. Outside the station, the stars burned cold and bright. Somewhere out there, human ships were new systems. Warriors were training with weapons for the first time in generations. Traders were building new routes free from Confederacy control. Artists were creating works that celebrated their independence. The galaxy was changing. The old order was dying. Something new was being born. Daniel Hayes stood at the observation window and watched a human freighter pass by on its way to distant worlds. The ship was small and unremarkable, but it flew free. It answered to no authority but its own. It went where it chose because no one had the right to stop it. "Do you think this will last?" he asked Lisa when she joined him at the window. "The peace, probably not forever. Someone will test us eventually, someone always does." "And when they do?" Lisa's expression hardened. It was the same look she had worn when she first refused the Confederacy's terms, the same look that had launched 17 ships against 47, the same look that had changed the course of galactic history. "Then we will remind them why we do not bargain." Daniel, that was all that needed to be said. Far below, the station elder was addressing his people for the first time as a free species. His voice carried across 1,000 worlds through communication networks that had once been used to deliver Confederacy orders. "We are no longer slaves," he declared. "We are no longer subjects. We are no longer afraid. The humans taught us that freedom is not given. It is taken. It is held. It is defended. Today we claim our freedom. Tomorrow we will defend it, and no power in the galaxy will ever take it from us again." The cheered. The and a dozen other species cheered. They cheered for themselves and for each other and for the strange, stubborn creatures from a small blue world who had shown them that the impossible was possible after all. The galaxy had panicked when humans refused to bargain. Now the galaxy was learning to follow their example. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, a new civilization was being born, not an empire built on force and fear, but a community built on choice and respect. It would face challenges, it would suffer setbacks. Nothing worth having ever came easy. But it would endure, because humanity had taught the galaxy a simple truth that would echo through the centuries to come. Some things are worth fighting for, some principles cannot be compromised, some lines should never be crossed. And those who refuse to bargain can change the universe.